On Thursday the 8th of May, just last month, a 16-year-old boy named Jordan Collins Jr., otherwise known as Manny, was last seen near the 4900 block of University Avenue in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, before he would mysteriously vanish without a trace. Sometime after 4 AM that night, he would speak to his mother before falling asleep on FaceTime with his girlfriend, as he did most nights, but the following morning his family would be shocked when he suddenly disappeared. At first, his loved ones assumed that he just needed some space, as on the previous day he had gone for a solitary walk to clear his head. But after weeks continued to pass with no contact and no social media activity, their fear quickly turned to dread. But the situation would only seem to escalate further, as after digging into the details of the case, the investigators would reveal that they had reason to believe Manny didn't leave on his own, and that he may have been abducted. So in response, they began to step up their efforts in the case. However, after teaming up with the FBI, as well as other search and rescue teams, the teenager still remains missing to this day, leaving his family understandably heartbroken as they are only left to wonder, what really happened to Manny Collins Jr., and why is he still missing after all this time? Jordan Dupree Collins Jr., otherwise known as Manny to his family and friends, was born in 2008 and raised in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, to a close and supportive family. He is described as gentle, thoughtful, and wise beyond his years, and he's always been well known for his warm smile and affectionate nature. From an early age, it would be safe to say that Manny stood out amongst the crowd. He was kind-hearted, deeply empathetic, and unusually mature for someone his age. He had a natural ability to connect with people, whether family, friends, or even strangers, and he carried a quiet strength that made him the emotional centre of his household. His mother, Ashley Berry, often said that Manny worried more about her well-being than his own. He texted her every day, called regularly, and made sure she always knew how much he loved her. Though Manny faced the same challenges many teenagers do, he approached them with determination and care. He loved basketball, skateboarding, gaming, and going to the gym. He dreamed of getting a job, becoming independent, and contributing to the family home, which eventually led Manny to apply for a job at Planet Fitness. But on top of this, he was also making plans with his mother to apply for a social security card, a small but meaningful step toward the future he was building. In 2024, Manny enrolled himself in an online school through St. Paul Public Schools, and at first, things seemed to be going really well. However, at some point during the semester, this bright start began to fade. So in an effort to refocus and get back on track, he was spending some time at his father's house for extra education. His dad, who was also known to be good at math, had agreed to help support Manny academically for the foreseeable future, and so he was living with him temporarily at the time. But the plan was that Manny would return to his mum's house on June 4th, just a few weeks later. The relationship Manny and his father shared was one of love, but also differences, mainly revolving around religious beliefs and parenting style. But despite these disagreements, Manny still loved and looked up to his father nonetheless. He had routines, goals, and structure, from sending weekly thank you texts when he received his allowance, to falling asleep on nightly FaceTime calls with his girlfriend, and never hinted at any distress. However, this is exactly why it would come as such a shock to his family, when he would suddenly stop responding to his messages, before he would mysteriously disappear on that fateful night in May. On Wednesday the 7th of May, the 16-year-old had been staying at his father's home in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, as part of a temporary arrangement designed to help him focus on school. And it seemed to be paying off, as that very night Manny appeared to be in good spirits. He FaceTimed with his girlfriend like always, and at around 4 AM she confirmed seeing him on camera, lying in bed, ready to fall asleep. He told her he loved her and wished her good night, but little did she know at the time that this would be the last confirmed sighting of him, as by next morning, Manny was nowhere to be found. What happened between the early morning hours and sunrise remains unclear. But what we do know is that sometime after that 4 AM call, Manny disappeared, leaving behind all of his personal belongings, including his clothing and his phone charger. According to his mother, Ashley Berry, he never left home without his phone charger, and he always kept in contact with her, texting or calling on a daily basis. Also, she was very skeptical about his father, who claimed that Manny had just gone to visit his girlfriend and grandmother, despite neither being able to confirm this to be the case. His girlfriend had actually expected to talk to Manny later that day, but her messages also went unanswered. So, as Mother's Day came and went with still no contact from Manny, the situation became increasingly more alarming, which was made even worse when that morning Manny's phone briefly turned on for exactly 3 minutes. However, despite this change in circumstances, Ashley continued to receive no calls or texts from Manny, with absolutely no indication of where he might be, and this would be the last time his phone ever showed any sign of activity. So, realizing that something was very wrong, Manny's mother decided that she had no other option but to officially report him as missing to the local police. On Monday the 12th of May, just 4 days after Manny Collins was last seen, the Columbia Heights Police Department would receive a call from Ashley Berry, who was riddled with worry given the sudden disappearance of her only child. According to Manny's father, he was supposed to be meeting up with his girlfriend that day, as well as his grandmother, but after speaking with them directly, neither were able to confirm seeing Manny that day, meaning something had likely happened to the teenager after leaving his father's residence. However, despite this, in the early stages of the investigation, the urgency of the situation seemed to be overlooked. Given that Manny was 16, there were vague suggestions that he may have chosen to leave voluntarily, but to those who knew him best, this theory simply didn't hold up. Manny had just received his weekly allowance, money which he typically spent right away, and yet it remained untouched. He was also about to interview for his dream position at a local gym, and was taking an online course which he felt a strong responsibility to complete. He had exciting plans for the summer and goals he was actively working toward, so the idea that he would simply walk away from all of that without a word made no sense at all. A sighting of Manny would eventually come forward by a witness who claimed to have seen a young man matching his description near the 4900 block of University Avenue in Columbia Heights. But this sighting had taken place on the same day he disappeared, and in the very same town, which didn't give the police too much more to work with. So as the days continued to pass with no more confirmed sightings, no digital footprints and no communication of any kind, authorities began to take the case much more seriously, noting that they believed Manny could have been in danger. It was at this point that the Columbia Heights Police Department began working closely with the FBI, as well as the Anoka County Sheriff's Office and North Star Search and Rescue, who collectively launched a full-scale investigation. Search teams were deployed and K9 units were brought in to assist in tracking any potential leads. But just when it seemed the situation couldn't get any more disturbing, the investigating officers would make a chilling announcement, explaining that they did not believe Manny had left on his own. On Friday the 16th of May, just over a week after Manny Collins was last seen, investigators decided to hold a press conference to help raise the profile of the case and to request the assistance of the public, as they now believed that Manny Collins Jr. had been abducted. Up until that point, much of the search had operated under the possibility that Manny may have chosen to leave for personal reasons, but following an exhaustive review of his digital activity, as well as mounting inconsistencies in the timeline of his last known whereabouts, authorities determined that something far more serious may have taken place. One of the most unsettling discoveries was the 3-minute window of unexplained activity on Manny's phone, which suddenly switched back on in the evening of Sunday the 11th of May, 3 days after he was last physically seen. Meanwhile, Manny's family grew increasingly desperate, leading his mother and girlfriend to speak directly with media outlets, urging the public to come forward with any information, no matter how minor it may seem. Flyers were also distributed across Columbia Heights and surrounding neighborhoods, and a digital billboard campaign was launched in the hopes of keeping Manny's face in the public eye. Back at the scene, investigators began cross-referencing surveillance footage from apartment complexes, gas stations, and traffic cameras in the area, but with no confirmed sightings or financial activity, the situation continued to grow darker by the day. Authorities confirmed that they were actively exploring multiple scenarios, including the possibility that Manny had been harmed by someone he knew, as during their investigations they had briefly spoken to a close friend of Manny's, who for some reason was refusing to cooperate. However, with no physical evidence of foul play and no eyewitness accounts placing him anywhere after May 8th, the case remained painfully open-ended. So unfortunately, to this day, Manny remains a missing person, as his family continues to hold on to the hope that he will eventually return, safe and alive. Now unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But thanks to the unwavering determination of Manny's family, his case continues to stay active and visible, with support from organisations like the Black and Missing Foundation, who have consistently shared his story in hopes of keeping his name and face at the forefront of the public's mind. So with this in mind, we have to hold on to the belief that it will only be a matter of time before the truth finally comes to light, giving Manny's loved ones the answers they so desperately deserve, and perhaps even leading them to the reunion they've been praying for since the day he disappeared. However, considering that Manny Collins has now been missing for a month, with no recent confirmed sightings or major developments, I can't help but feel that the likelihood of his safe return is only growing weaker as the days pass. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, just before I dive into the theories themselves, I feel it is important to first acknowledge how difficult this situation must be for his family. Any theory that implies that he may have been harmed or is no longer with us is understandably difficult to process, so I will do my best to approach these ideas with the utmost respect, focusing on what is publicly known rather than digging too deep into unnecessary speculation. So with that in mind, one theory that was briefly considered early on in the investigation was the possibility that Manny may have chosen to leave on his own, possibly due to stress or an argument that pushed him over the edge. Now, I want to make it clear that this theory was quickly dismissed by both investigators and Manny's family, and that it emerged during those first crucial days when very little information was available. However, before we completely write it off, I feel it is important to be thorough, as every single detail in a missing person case is important. So if we briefly consider this theory to be true, what could have led Manny to want to disappear on his own accord? Well, he had mentioned to his mother the day before he disappeared that he was going for a walk to clear his head. This would imply that something was troubling him, so perhaps it was these same troubles that could have led him to want to disappear. In addition, he had been staying with his father, who by all accounts he did not always get on with, so this could have also been another reason as to why he would want to get away. To accompany this explanation, the reason Manny was staying with his father in the first place was because he was struggling with his online education. So again, this could have been a motive for wanting to run away from his responsibilities. I know his mother Ashley Berry has made it very clear in interviews that Manny would never abandon his life and that he was the emotional centre of the household, keeping everyone together. But perhaps the pressure of maintaining this high level of responsibility as a teenager could have eventually become too much for him. However, before I get too carried away, we have to acknowledge the fact that the authorities have more or less dismissed the runaway theory entirely, and it's not too surprising to see why. For one, Manny had incredibly strong emotional ties to his mother and girlfriend, both of whom he communicated with regularly. So the idea of him cutting off all contact with them without a word seems completely out of character. Secondly, he left behind his personal belongings, including his phone charger and some money, and according to his family, he never forgot to pick up his weekly allowance, which he had earned and often relied on. So if he had been planning to leave, he surely would have taken those things with him. There has also been no digital activity since May 8th, no texts, no calls, and no social media updates. In today's world, even people trying to vanish usually leave some kind of trail. But with that being said, some have tried to explore a variation of this theory, suggesting that maybe Manny did leave voluntarily, at least at first, maybe even impulsively, but that he then encountered someone dangerous shortly afterward, leaving him vulnerable to exploitation or worse. What we do know is that there's no history of Manny ever running away before, and no clear reason why he would have. His future wasn't perfect, but he had plans, relationships, and a routine, things people don't just walk away from without cause. So while the runaway theory may have briefly circulated in the early days, for many following the case, especially his family, the evidence just doesn't support the idea that Manny Collins disappeared by choice. So with this in mind, is it possible that Manny's disappearance could have been the result of intentional foul play? Well, ever since authorities publicly stated that they did not believe Manny had left on his own, suspicions began to intensify around the place he was last seen. One widely discussed theory is that something may have happened to Manny in this area, such as an unexpected confrontation. Whether this incident was intentional or accidental, it's possible that Manny was harmed, and then his disappearance was covered up in an attempt to avoid consequences. This theory then gained even more weight when it was revealed that there was no surveillance footage, no outgoing texts or calls, and no confirmed witnesses placing Manny anywhere after that night. His phone was left behind, along with other personal items, and more disturbingly, he never picked up his weekly allowance, which again is something his family insists he would never intentionally skip, implying that he may have been taken against his will. So if Manny had plans, and he was actively speaking to his family and friends just hours earlier, it becomes extremely difficult to believe that he simply walked away voluntarily, and yet, despite this information, no arrests have been made so far. This has understandably led to growing frustration from his family, who have repeatedly questioned why more aggressive action hasn't been taken by the investigators, especially as during their investigations, the police had briefly spoken to a close friend of Manny's who was refusing to cooperate. So with all these suspicious details in mind, some members of the community have even begun to wonder if this friend could have helped cover up Manny's disappearance, or worse, if multiple people have been involved in keeping the truth from surfacing. However, once again, before I get too carried away, without any concrete evidence, this theory remains nothing more than speculation for the time being. But what cannot be denied is that if Manny didn't leave on his own accord, then somebody is responsible. So, if foul play was involved in Manny's disappearance, then the question is, who could be responsible and why? Well, another theory that has been quietly gaining traction among online communities and some individuals close to the case is the unsettling possibility that Manny Collins may have been abducted, either in a targeted manner or as the result of an opportunistic encounter on the night he vanished. Now, to better understand this theory, it's important to consider the broader context of the Twin Cities area, which includes Minneapolis, St. Paul, and suburbs like Fridley, where Manny was last seen. This region has unfortunately seen its share of trafficking and youth exploitation cases in recent years, some of which have involved young people disappearing without a trace, only to be discovered later under disturbing circumstances. Manny, just 16 years old at the time, may have been particularly vulnerable that night, not just because of his age, but because he was in a residential setting that was unfamiliar to him. So, supporters of this theory believe that someone could have lured or coerced Manny into a situation he couldn't get out of. Now, whether that person was part of an organised trafficking operation or simply someone looking to exploit a moment of vulnerability remains unknown. But what is clear is that something nefarious very likely occurred that day. However, despite the disturbing nature of this theory, it must be said that no physical evidence has yet to be uncovered to directly support the idea that Manny was trafficked or abducted, at least not publicly, and for that reason, this theory remains nothing more than speculative, at least for now. But while the trafficking theory may not yet be confirmed by authorities, the circumstances of Manny's disappearance, including his age, the environment, the sudden cut-off of communication, and the broader risks present in the area, certainly keep this possibility very much on the table. So with this in mind, please make sure to share this story with as many people as you can, as I fear that without our support, Manny's case may fall into obscurity like so many others from the past. Anyway, on that note, I think I'll leave this video here. But as always, if you have any other theories of your own which you think may help explain what really happened to Manny Collins, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. But until next time, thank you so much for watching and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you found this video interesting, feel free to check out the playlist on screen now, which covers the many other cases of young men who continue to disappear across America, never to be seen alive again.